Thank you very much. I don't know how many of you folks have ever been to a real Irish wake, but I never miss them. You know the difference between an Irish wedding and an Irish wake? One less drunk. This uncle of mine was on his way to a wake that night with a couple of fellas, and they stopped in a saloon, and one guy said to the bartender, he said, "I'll have 3 feathers." And the other guy said, "I'll have 4 roses." And the uncle said, "I'll have 5 martinis." And they finally staggered out of there, and they were getting in the car, and one guy said to the uncle, "Dennis, are you going to drive?" He said, "I'll have to. I can't walk." And they got the car in a busy one-way street going in the wrong direction, and the cop stopped them. He said, "Where are you guys going? Didn't you see the arrows?" And the uncle said, "I didn't even see the Indians." And the cop said, "Well, where are you going?" And the uncle said, "I don't know, but we must be late because everybody else is coming back." They finally stopped in front of the wrong house, and they staggered into somebody's living room, and they knelt at the piano. And one Irishman looked at the other, and he said, "I don't know who your friend was, but he had a beautiful set of teeth." And the other guy said, "Yeah, but there's a bad one here and there." They finally kicked them out of there, and they ended up in the middle of the New Haven railroad tracks, and here were these 3 drunks walking down the railroad tracks at midnight. One of them looked down, and he said, "This is the longest flight of stairs I've ever seen." And the other guy said, "I don't mind these stairs so much, but it's these low banisters that are getting me." One thing about my uncle, you know, he came over from the old country. He settled in Boston. He got married. He had 13 children. He never left Boston. I don't think he ever left the house. He was always afraid to come home and ask, "What's new?" I said to him one time, "Why don't you come to New York?" He said to me, "What'll I see in New York?" I said, "Oh, there's a lot of things you can see. The Radio City, Shea Stadium, Yankee Stadium, the Hudson River, the Empire State Building." So he and the wife came down and checked into a hotel, had a good time, had a good dinner. The next day he walked out in the street, and he couldn't get across the street with all the traffic, the cars and buses and the trucks. And the signs kept saying, "Don't walk." So he said to a cop, "You know, I'd like to go sightseeing. When's the best time?" And the cop said, "Sunday morning." He said, "How come?" And the cop said, "There's nobody around. All the Catholics are in church. All the Protestants are in bed. All the Jewish people are up in the Catskills." You know, the following Sunday he was crossing 7th Avenue and he got run over by a Seventh-day Adventist. While he was here, he got a job driving a cab when they had the strike. Remember when they had the taxi strike? Well, he was driving one of those non-union cabs, you know, the ones without the windshields. And he had the cab parked right in front of Grand Central Station. And the Episcopal bishop got in his cab. That's a Jesuit that flunked Latin. He got in my uncle's cab and he said, "Take me up to Christ Church." So the uncle took him up to St. Patrick's Cathedral. And the bishop got mad. He said, "I said Christ Church." And the uncle said, "Look, if he's not here, he's not in town." Isn't that a tragedy, eh? Speaking of church, my uncle never missed church, you know. He went every Sunday. Last Sunday he came out of church and he grabbed a hold of our pastor, Father Sweeney, and he said, "Father, that was a damn fine sermon." And Father Sweeney said, "Well, I appreciate the compliment, but I don't like your language." And the uncle said, "Well, it was such a damn fine sermon, I put a $100 bill in the collection plate." And Father Sweeney said, "The hell you did." Well, they have a good sense of humor, clergymen. Last Halloween, one of the kids in our neighborhood got a hold of a dead donkey. Well, we have a lot of them in Boston. They got a hold of this dead donkey, and they left it right on Father Sweeney's lawn. And he got up to say 7 o'clock Mass, and he looked out and he saw this corpse. So he picked up the phone and he called the chief of police. He said, "Chief, this is Father Sweeney calling. I'd like to report that we have a dead jackass on the lawn." And the chief of police said, "Well, isn't it the duty of the clergy to take care of the dead?" And Father Sweeney says, "It is, but I just thought I'd call up and notify the next of kin." And you know how the people in the parish, you know, give them gifts at Christmas? Last Christmas, one of the women in our parish gave Father Sweeney a set of linen towels marked his and hers. And he called up the bishop and he said, "Don't you think I ought to give them back?" And the bishop said, "You better hang on to them for a while, because with this new pope, you never know what rules are going to change." He hadn't been feeling very good, and he went to the doctor. And the doctor gave him a checkup, and he said, "You're all right. You're 82 years old, but you're in good shape. However, I would prescribe one thing. Take a drink now and then. Do you good." Father Sweeney said, "I couldn't do that. I got a housekeeper from the old country, and she's death on the stuff. She wouldn't permit any whiskey in the house in any way, shape, or form." The doctor said, "Never mind the housekeeper. Get a bottle of whiskey, take it up to your room, and when she brings you up the water to shave with, make yourself a drink. She'll never know the difference." Father Sweeney said, "I'll try." About a week later, Father Sweeney was walking down the street with the housekeeper, and he went in the store to get something, and the doctor came along, and he said to the housekeeper, "How's Father Sweeney?" She said, "Oh, he's fine. He's got a new spring in his step and color in his cheeks, but he's getting senile." And the doctor said, "How come?" She said, "He's shaving 12 times a day." You know, he was what we call a professional Irishman. He hated the English. Oh, he used to blame the English for everything. If there was a flood, the English did it. There was a fire, the English did it. And the bishop called him up one day and he said, "You know, you got to cut this out. We're getting complaints. Don't talk about the English anymore, because if you do, you're going to be reprimanded. This is the ecumenical year. We don't do that anymore. Now, don't talk about them anymore. If you do, you're going to be punished." And Father Sweeney said, "I'll try." The following Sunday, he came out to give the sermon. And he said, "Today I'd like to talk about the Last Supper. We know the story well, how the good Lord stood there with his 12 disciples, and he said, 'Before the night is over, one of you will betray me.' And he looked at Matthew, and Matthew said, 'Not me.' Then he looked at Luke, and Luke said, 'I would never do such a thing.' Then he looked long and hard and straight at Judas, and Judas said, 'Oh, blimey, governor, you can't mean me.'" You know, he used to love, Father Sweeney used to love to fish. He was out in the middle of the lake the other day fishing with the rabbi and the minister. And he turned around to the other two clergymen and he said, "Boys, I forgot my tackle box." And he stepped out of the boat and he walked right across the top of the water. Went into his car, got the tackle box, walked back across the top of the water, got in the boat. The rabbi said, "My wife got a lunch, I'll get it." He stepped out of the boat and he walked across the top of the water. Got the lunch, walked back across the top of the water, got in the boat. And the minister said, "I got the six-pack." He stepped out of the boat and he fell 80 feet into the bottom of the lake. And Father Sweeney looked at the rabbi and he said, "You know, we should have told him where the stones were." You know, the housekeeper I told you about, she had a tendency to come running in every 5 minutes and say, "Father, my television set's broken." He said, "It's not your television set. It's our television set. The parish bought it for us. It's ours." Next day she'd come in, "Father, my refrigerator's broken." He'd say, "It's not, I told you before. It's not mine. It's not yours. It's ours." She said, "I'll remember that." A couple of days later, the bishop was in having a conference with Father Sweeney, and she came rushing in. She said, "Father, Father." He said, "What is it now?" She said, "There's a mouse under our bed." You know, he was a great man, Father Sweeney, 82 years old. He was a great man, a great speaker, except as he got older, he got forgetful. I'll never forget one Sunday he gave a sermon, and his text was the loaves of bread and the fishes. And he came out and he said, "The good Lord stood on the shores of Galilee, and with 50,000 loaves of bread and 20,000 fishes, he fed 7 people. And my uncle was in the front row and he said, "Anybody could do that." And Father Sweeney ignored him. And when the Mass was over, he got a hold of his assistant and he said, "How come that Sullivan is heckling me right in the middle of the sermon?" And the assistant said, you got the text a little mixed up. It's not 50,000 loaves of bread and 20,000 fishes feeding 7 people. It's 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes, and he fed a multitude. And Father Sweeney said, well, I'll straighten that out next Sunday. And the following Sunday, he came out again. He said, I'd like to resume where I left off last week. The good Lord was standing there on the shores of Galilee. And with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes, he fed 40,000 people. And what do you think of that, Sully? And the uncle said, I could do that too. And Father Sweeney said, how? And the uncle said, I just used what we had left over from last Sunday. Last Sunday, he gave another sermon, and his text was the 10 Commandments. And he had the whole congregation sitting right on the edge of their seats. Even the people in the choir were paying attention. And as Father Sweeney told that great story about Moses and the 10 Commandments, one of the sopranos was leaning out of the choir loft listening to every word, and she lost her balance and she fell out. And as she fell, her skirt got caught in the chandelier, and there she hung. And Father Sweeney looked up and he said, any man that looks at that woman will be stricken blind. And my uncle leaned over to his wife and he said, I think I'll risk one eye. They call him Popeye now, you know. The other day I was coming in on a jet, and I was sitting right next to a priest. We were 30,000 feet in the air, and the 2 left motors stopped, and I turned to the priest and I said, do something. He said, I'm sorry, I'm in sales, not management. Then the plane came in over the airport, and the other 2 motors stopped, so the stewardess ran up and down the aisle checking safety belts. And she looked at me and she said, Mr. Joyce, we're in a little trouble, say a little prayer. I said, well, right now I can't think of any. She said, well, do something religious. So I took up a collection. You know, the church I attend, they never take collections. Once a year they get 3 automobiles and they put them up in front of the church and they sell chances. And last year they raffled off a Cadillac, a Buick, and a Chevrolet. And 3 days after the raffle, the pastor was walking down the street and he bumped into one of my relatives coming out of a thirst parlor. And the uncle looked at the good father and he said, excuse me, could you tell me who won the automobiles, who won the Cadillac? And the priest said, why, the cardinal did, wasn't he lucky? And the uncle said, well, who won the Buick? And the priest said, why, the Monsignor did, wasn't he lucky? And the uncle said, well, tell me who won the Chevy? And the priest said, why, Father Murphy did, wasn't he lucky? And at that moment the uncle started to go back to get another drink. And the priest grabbed him, he said, by the way, how many tickets did you buy? And the uncle said, I didn't buy a damn one, wasn't I lucky? And this church is right across the street from a synagogue, and the rabbi and the priest are very good friends. In fact, a few weeks ago, they each bought a new Oldsmobile, and they had the cars out on Route 1, and they were testing them out for speed and power. They were going along about 60 miles an hour, and all of a sudden the rabbi pulled in front of the priest. And there they were going down the highway, 60, 65, the rabbi in front, the priest in back, and all of a sudden an old lady started across the road. The rabbi slammed the brakes on, and the priest couldn't stop, and he went right into the back of the rabbi's car, and there was a terrific crash. Both cars were demolished. And the 2 of them staggered out of the wreckage, and the priest got very upset. And he walked up to the rabbi, and he said, when you stop a car like that, why don't you give a signal? Put your hand out, put the brake on. You didn't do a thing. You stopped short with no signal. I went right in the back of you, ruined the 2 cars. Look at the mess we got here. And the rabbi said, don't get excited, Father. We got insurance. You're getting flustered, you're getting red in the face, you're going to have a heart attack. I got a bottle of brandy here, better take a drink and calm down. So the priest took a drink. He said, what about the license, the registration? Let's get the papers out. We can't block the road all day. And the rabbi said, don't worry about the license. The registration I got will unblock the road, take another drink. And the priest took another belt out of the jug. He said, well, call the insurance company, get a tow truck. And the rabbi said, don't worry about the insurance company, they'll send the tow truck, take another drink. And the priest said, I just took 2. When are you going to take one? The rabbi said, don't be silly. I'm waiting for the state police. And they came. 20 minutes later, the state police car pulled up, and a big Irish cop jumped out, and he looked at the damage, and he turned to the priest, and he said, how fast was this guy with the bottle going when he backed into you, Father? Last year, right in the middle of one of those big blizzards, this uncle of mine staggered out of a saloon. He was staggering along through the blizzard, and he tripped over some debris, and he fell into a ditch 30 feet deep, broke both his legs, broke his arm, wrenched his back. While he was lying in the bottom of this ditch with the snow and the sleet and the slush coming down on him, a policeman came along. He looked into the hole. He said, "What's the matter down there?" And the uncle said, "Oh, I got 2 broken legs and a broken arm, and I hurt me back. Would you get me a rabbi?" So the cop went to the box and he put the call in. 10 minutes later, the wagon showed up with a rabbi and a ladder. They stuck the ladder down the hole, and the rabbi climbed down, and the snow and the sleet and the slush was still falling. And he started to comfort the uncle, and the uncle said to him, "Would you give me the last rites?" And the rabbi said, "The last rites, what's your name?" He said, "Sullivan." And the rabbi said, "Well, you want a priest?" And the uncle said, "You don't think I'd ask a priest to come out in a night like this?" They put him in the hospital. You know, he was in the hospital 6 weeks, and one of his friends came in to see him. And there was the poor uncle in bed with the legs in traction and the arms in splints and the head done up in a bandage. And the guy walked over to the bed and he took one look at him and he said, "Dennis, you look fine. You'll be able to hit at no time at all." And the uncle said, "What did you say?" And the guy said, "I said you look fine. You'll be able to hit at no time at all." And the uncle said, "What did you say?" And the guy said, "What the hell's the matter? You getting deaf?" He said, "No, but I've been laying here for 6 weeks without a drink, and your breath is like a breeze from heaven." He finally got a hold of a good lawyer, and he sued the city for negligence. He claimed they didn't put any lanterns up around the hole he fell into. And they wheeled him in a South Boston court on a stretcher in front of an Irish judge and 12 Irish jurors. Oh, he had everything going for him. And they put him up on the witness stand, and he testified he was paralyzed from the chin down. And he had been many times. And after 2 days of testimony, the judge and jury awarded the uncle $500,000, and while he was lying there with a big smile on his face, the lawyer from the insurance company walked by, and he took one look at him, and he said, "You're no more paralyzed than I am, but they believe you, and we have to pay you the money. Well, let me tell you one thing, you'll never enjoy one nickel of it, because we're going to follow you 24 hours a day for the rest of your life, and the first time you just move your little finger, we're going to put you in jail for fraud." And the uncle said, "Is that so? Well, let me tell you something, bucko. They're going to wheel me right out of this courtroom and carry me downstairs and put me in an ambulance, and they're going to drive me over to the airport, and they're going to place me on a chartered plane, and they're going to fly me over to Paris, France, and they're going to meet me over there with another ambulance, and then they're going to drive me to the shrine at Lourdes, and there you're going to see the greatest miracle you ever saw." Oh, they love Paris. You know. In fact, they spent a month over there. They were walking down the Champs-Élysées one day, and they met one of their neighbors, and the 2 women started to talk. This woman said to my aunt, she said, "Nora, I've been in Paris for 3 days, and I haven't been to the Louvre yet." My aunt said, "I haven't either. It must be the water." You know, they had a big party there at the American Embassy, and the guest of honor was General de Gaulle, and he was shaking hands with everybody, and he picked my aunt up and he kissed her. And she looked up at him, and she said, "Oh, my God." And he looked down, and he said, "You may call me Charles." They finally came home, stopped in Dublin, bought a little Irish whiskey. When they were coming through customs, the guy was going through the suitcase, and my aunt had a bottle of John Jameson's Irish whiskey. And he said, "Well, what's that?" She said, "Holy water." He said, "That's Irish whiskey." She said, "Oh, my God, another miracle." But he's back in Boston now, my uncle. He's got a good job there. He's a cop. He's the best cop money could buy. Never took a quarter. If you couldn't fold it, he wouldn't take it. Resumed his hobby, drinking. He staggered home drunk the other night at 2 o'clock in the morning, stepped on the cat, knocked over the television set, and his wife jumped out of bed, and she grabbed him right by the back of the neck, walked him out the door, took him up the end of the street, and walked him up on top of a big hill. And at the bottom of this hill at 2 o'clock in the morning, there was a big building with all the lights on, and the smoke was pouring out of the chimneys. And the aunt looked at the uncle, and she said, "Dennis, do you see that building down there? That's a brewery, and they can make it faster than you can drink it." He said, "I know, but I got them working nights." A couple of nights later, he came home in the same condition, and his 2 oldest boys grabbed him and took him up the other end of the street, walked him into a cemetery. There was an open grave, and they dropped him in. Let him stay there all night. The next morning, he got up at 6 o'clock, and he stood up in the grave and looked across the cemetery, and he saw the mist rising above the tombstones. And he scratched his head and he said, "Glory be to the Father, it's Resurrection Day and an Irishman's the first man up." You know, he was in a saloon the other night having a drink with a Scotchman and a Jewish guy, and they had about 6 drinks. And the bartender finally said, "Who's going to pay for the booze?" And the Scotchman was heard to say, "I will." And the headline in the paper the next day read, "Jewish ventriloquist found murdered." He was in the same saloon a couple of nights later, and there was a guy sitting next to him, and this uncle of mine turned around to the guy, and he said, "What do you got there?" And the guy said, "I have a French poodle for my wife." And the uncle said, "Geez, I wish I could make a trade like that." And the guy said, "Well, how is your wife?" And the uncle said, "Compared to what?" He said, "She's so fat she was running upstairs the other night in a pair of slacks, and it looked like 2 little boys fighting under a blanket." He said, "If she ran away with my best friend, I'd miss him." She used to send people into the saloon to get him out. One night he wouldn't come out, so she walked in and grabbed him right by the back of the neck, and she said, "You get right home." He said, "I will not." She said, "You get right home and no back talk, or I'll give you the back of me hand, now get home." He said, "I'm not leaving here until you have a drink with me." So the bartender poured her out a drink, and she took 1 sip, and she went, "Pooh, that's awful." He said, "You're damn right it is, and you always think I'm down here having a good time." He staggered in the other night loaded, and the wife said to him, "Where have you been?" He said, "I bought something for the house." She said, "What the hell did you buy for the house?" He said, "A round of drinks." And last year on his wife's birthday, he bought her a cemetery lot. And this year she said, "Where's my present?" He said, "You didn't use the one I bought you last year." Oh, he was always buying things. You know, he came home the other night and he said to the wife, he said, "Nora, I got a great bargain." She said, "What did you buy now?" He said, "I got 4 white-wall tires studded with rhinestones." She said, "For what? You don't even own a car." He said, "You buy brassieres." He came home the other night and he said to her, he said, "Nora, how high is a penguin?" She said, "They're 1 foot high." He said, "You sure they're not 4 feet high?" She said, "No, they're only 1 foot high." "Why?" He said, "I think I just ran over a nun." Speaking of, he was walking down the street the other night and there were 2 nuns coming toward him, and he was drunk and they didn't want to get involved, so one went to the left and one went to the right, and he walked right between them and turned around and said, "How the hell did she do that?" Did you hear about the nun that inherited the money, and the Mother Superior said, "Well, what are you going to do with the money?" She said, "I'm going to give it to the first poor man I meet." And she walked out on the street and she met this poor guy and she handed him $100 and she said to him, "Godspeed." The next day the convent doorbell rang and she answered the door and this guy handed her $2,000. She said, "What's this for?" He said, "Godspeed came in and paid 20 to 1. You know, she finally got sick and tired of all the drinking he was doing, and she went to the priest. And the priest said to her, "Well, when he comes home drunk, what do you do?" And she said, "Well, I'm not very nice to him, I'll tell you that. In fact, I'm downright nasty to him. I'm getting sick and tired of him coming home drunk every night in the week." And the priest said, "Well, maybe that's why he drinks. Your disposition. He's a hard-working man. He deserves a drink now and then. Next time he has a few, don't nag him, humor him. Be nice to him. Maybe the switch will do him some good." A couple of nights later, he came home blind. And she let him in the living room and sat him in the easy chair, took his shoes off, put his slippers on, stuck a pipe in his mouth, lit that. Then she looked him right in the eye and she said, "Darling, would you like another drink?" He said, "I might just as well. I'm going to get hell when I get home anyway." And the very next day, he was walking down the street and he bumped into the priest. And the good father was going to bawl him out, but the uncle got the first word in. He said, "Excuse me, Father, could you tell me what's this disease, arthritis?" And the priest figured it'd scare him. He said, "Certainly, that's a disease you get when you stay out all night and drink too much whiskey and carouse around a bit. How long have you had it?" And the uncle says, oh, I don't have it, but I was reading in the paper this morning where the bishop has a touch of it. And the priest looked him right in the eye, and he said, if I ever catch you in this condition again, I'm going to have you excommunicated. And the next day he met the uncle, and the uncle was loaded. And he walked right up to the priest, and he said, out of my way, Father, make way for a Protestant. And he staggered down the street, and he tripped over the curbstone, and when he fell down, he broke the pint in his back pocket. And as he felt the liquid running down his leg, he looked up and he said, oh, my God, I hope it's blood. They finally put him in a taxi cab and sent him home. And when he was walking in the backyard, his wife jumped out behind the rose bush with a sheet over her head. And she said, oh, I'm the devil. He said, well, shake hands with me. I married your sister. You know what he did the other day? He was walking down the street with one foot on the sidewalk and the other one in the gutter. And the priest came up to him, Father Sweeney, and he said, what are you doing? You got one foot on the sidewalk and the other in the gutter. And the uncle said, was I doing that? And Father Sweeney said, you were? He said, oh, thank God, I thought I was lame. He was a man of many talents, my uncle. You know how policemen and firemen moonlight, you know, they do these extra jobs? He used to do that. One of the things he did, he was a piano mover. And one day they were moving a piano into the Statler Hotel in Boston, and they were hoisting it up the side of the building. And they got it up to the 6th floor, and it got very windy. And the wind blew so hard, it blew this piano right through a window, and it stuck. And the helper looked at the uncle, and he said, Dennis, you hold on to the rope, and I'll go down and loose it. The uncle held on to the ropes. The helper got in the elevator, went up to the 6th floor, walked into the room, and there was a big piano stuck in the window. He gave this piano a hell of a push, and it flew out the window, and it fell. And as it fell, Dennis came up, still hanging onto the rope. The piano hit the sidewalk and smashed into a million pieces. And when the weight was taken off the rope, Dennis came down again, and he hit the sidewalk, and he lay there in a heap. And all this time, his helper was in the window watching everything that went on. He ran down the stairs, and there was a big crowd of people gathered around his friend's body, and he said, out of me way, give that man some air. And he picked him up in his arms, and he said, speak to me, Dennis, speak to me. And Dennis opened one eye rather weakly, and he said, speak to you. Why the hell should I speak to you? I passed you twice, and you didn't speak to me. He finally went to Florida to recuperate. He was all right. But, as will happen, he came to an end in Florida. He got drunk one night, fell in the swimming pool, and drowned. And they shipped his body back to Boston. They had it in the house the first day, and one of the women came in and said to the widow, she said, you know, he looks good. And the widow said, why wouldn't he? He just came back from Miami. One of the guys from the neighborhood came in the first day, said the prayers, 8 o'clock in the morning, went into the kitchen, stayed there for 3 meals, got drunk, left at 2 o'clock in the morning. The next day he showed up again, 8 o'clock, back in the kitchen, had 3 more meals, got drunk, left at 3 o'clock, got in 2 fights. The third day he was sitting there, and the widow walked over and she said, you know, you must have been a good friend to be husbands. He said, I was. She said, well, we have a problem. We don't know whether to bury him or to cremate him. And the guy said, well, why the hell don't you stuff him and keep the party going? One of the other guys in the corner came in, and he put his hand on the dead man's forehead, and he said, goodbye, Dennis. And he turned to the widow, and he said, you know, he still feels a little warm. She said, hot or cold, he goes out at 9 in the morning. And the priest came in, you know. The priest came in, and he said a few prayers, and he put his arm around the widow, and he said, Nora, I'm awful sorry for your troubles. She said, I know, but my husband is gone. He said, tell me one thing, was he a good church-going man? She said, oh, he was. He went to Mass every Sunday. He belonged to the Holy Name Society and the Knights of Columbus, and he was active in the CYO. And the priest said, what about Civic Bride? How was he in the neighborhood? She said, well, he was in the Rotary Club and the Chamber of Commerce and the Moose and the Elks and the Eagles, and he was an umpire in the Little League. And the priest said, what about patriotism? Was he a good American? She said, he was in the both wars. He belonged to the VFW and the 40 and 8 and the American Legion and the DAV and the AMVETS. The priest said, well, I heard a rumor he was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. She said, the Ku who? He said, the Ku Klux Klan, you know, those devils under the sheets. She said, oh, he was a charter member of that. One thing I forgot to tell you before we go. My uncle went to a wake one night. This is the true story. He went to a wake with his friend Timmy. And you know, in Boston, they still have the wakes in the living room. They don't have them in the funeral home. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, my uncle and Timmy were the only two guys left in the living room with the guest of honor. And my uncle said to Timmy, let's take Pat out of the box and take him down for one last drink. So they lifted the poor corpse out of the box. They walked him down the street, took him into a saloon, sat him in a chair, and the uncle said to the bartender, bring us a bottle. So the bartender brought a bottle and 3 glasses, went back behind the bar. 20 minutes later, the bottle was empty. The uncle said, bring us another bottle. And as the bartender was bringing the bottle, the uncle and Timmy got up and went to the men's room. And the bartender walked over in front of the corpse, and he put the bottle down. He said, who's going to pay for the 2 bottles? And the guy just sat there. He said, come on, I want the money. And the guy didn't move. So he shook him a little bit, and the guy fell on the floor. And as he fell, the uncle and Timmy were coming back, and they grabbed the bartender, and they said, what are you hitting our friend for? He said, I had to hit him. He pulled a knife on me a foot long. But when he was drunk, he used to love to sing. You know, I'd like to sing one of the songs he used to like to sing, a little Irish prayer that goes a little bit like this. May the wind always be at your back, laddie. May the hills never be too steep. And may God always rest on your pillow at night when you're fast asleep. May good luck always be by your side, laddie. May you miss all life's heartaches and tears. May the wind always be at your back, laddie, down through the years. Thank you very much.